Gaming is big business, and nobody knows that better than Sony. And while they know it's important to keep your friends close, it's even more important to buy and own your best ones. At the end of 2019, Sony decided to acquire Insomniac Games, the creators of legendary titles such as Spyro the Dragon, Ratchet & Clank, and Marvel's Spider-Man, to the tune of $229 million. But how exactly does Sony buying Insomniac benefit them? And why did they decide to pull the trigger when they did? To answer these and other questions, we invite you to sit back and relax as we explain why Sony buying Insomniac Games was a 1000 IQ move. Formerly known as Extreme Software, Insomniac Games started all the way back in 1994. Believe it or not, their very first game entitled Disruptor that was developed for the PS1 and released in 1996, while by no means a bad game, did so badly commercially that it almost led to the company filing for bankruptcy and shutting down for good. But mercifully, Insomniac then went on to release Spyro the Dragon in 1998, which turned out to be such a great commercial success that it led to the creation of two similarly successful sequels, namely Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage, which came out in 1999, and Spyro Year of the Dragon in 2000. With all three games performing well and receiving universal acclaim from fans and critics alike, Insomniac managed to establish themselves as a top-rate developer in a very short period of time. In all truth though, Spyro was just the start of Insomniac's success story. The now well-established studio then collaborated closely with Sony Computer Entertainment, which we all now know as Sony Interactive Entertainment, to produce two more game franchises, namely Ratchet & Clank and Resistance. And if you know anything about the world of gaming, at least one, if not both of these names should be more than familiar to you. Both Ratchet & Clank as well as Resistance turned out to be extremely successful franchises, and while the last mainline Resistance game came out for the PS3 in 2011, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is the latest game in the franchise that was released for the PS5 in 2021. And in case you were wondering whether Insomniac still has it or not, Rift Apart has a Metacritic rating of 88%, so it's definitely safe to say they haven't lost their touch. But even developers as capable as Insomniac aren't immune to some missteps. When the studio decided to launch its first multi-platform game in the form of 2013's Fuse, it was met with mixed reviews. As such, it holds a Metacritic rating of 63 out of 100 for the PS3 and 62 out of 100 for the Xbox 360. But even though Fuse ultimately had a lukewarm reception, it's obviously not a bad game, but it's undeniably far from Insomniac's typically high standards. I gotta say, if one of your worst rated games has a 3 out of 5 star rating and you generally crack 4 and 5 star ratings, it really is testament to the overall quality of the work you do in general, and this couldn't be any truer in the case of Insomniac. So while they may be capable of producing something mediocre or lackluster, I dare say they've never made anything close to bad in their nearly 3-decade-long history. Missteps aside, one could argue that Insomniac's magnum opus, or at the very least one of their best games to date, is none other than Marvel's Spider-Man from 2018. So what is it that makes this particular adaptation of the iconic web-slinging hero so damn good? For starters, nailing any adaptation is no simple task. It's of the utmost importance that you treat the source material with great care and do your best to do it justice. As a hero, Spider-Man is far from stoic or brooding. Most of the time, Peter Parker dishes out some witty retorts and sarcastic one-liners along with his web, and while this may not be unique to comic book superheroes and villains, there's no doubting that Peter Parker's character is highly nuanced and unique in its own right, which is exactly why Spider-Man is such a singularly relatable and popular character. But in spite of the odds, Insomniac were able to capture Parker's character perfectly and transpose it into a graphically impressive, highly immersive world that resonated well with fans and critics in an unprecedented way. But Marvel's Spider-Man goes a step further and delivers the story of Spider-Man and his origins, which has been told and retold countless times, in such a way that you almost feel as though you're witnessing it for the first time and feeling the full gravitas of what it means to Parker. Marvel's Spider-Man stays as true to the lore as humanly possible and is a game that delivers amazing action, many humorous moments, and some extremely poignant ones to balance it out. It's masterful storytelling and expert narrative-driven game design that only Insomniac is capable of delivering, and the results are indisputable. The game has a Metacritic rating of 87%, and the remastered 2022 version on Steam has an incredible 96% rating based on 54,400 reviews. Considering just how much can go wrong in games featuring superheroes, and seeing how many of them often end up being dull and devoid of personality, Marvel's Spider-Man has to be one of, if not the greatest superhero games ever made. With such an amazing track record of success, which is paralleled by very few studios and exceeded by even fewer, it really isn't any surprise that Sony decided to take the plunge and acquire Insomniac Games, especially following the resounding success of Marvel's Spider-Man. And seeing that Sony only had to pay $229 million, which is a very small sum for the multi-billion-dollar gaming giant to acquire Insomniac Games, there's almost no doubt that their return on investment has been exponential. I mean, there's Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart that have all been released for the PS5 since Sony's acquisition. And seeing that each one of these titles has enjoyed considerable success, the bigwigs at Sony must be smiling all the way to the bank. But you all know that this isn't where it ends for Insomniac Games or Sony, not by a long shot. Whether you're a PlayStation fan or not, probably the most anticipated release on the PS5 this year is the upcoming Marvel's Spider-Man 2, which is due to come out on October 20th, 2023. Following the widespread acclaim the first game received, it was inevitable that a sequel would be in the works, and now it's almost here. So maybe you're wondering if Spider-Man 2 will be good or not. I would say there's absolutely no reason to think it'll be bad, and I personally have every confidence that it will not only be as good as the first game, but improve upon it in almost every way as well. And if the initial feedback from critics regarding Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is anything to go by, the hype levels have only increased since sampling Insomniac Games' latest title for just a few hours. The thing is, Insomniac's relationship with Sony goes back decades, and seeing that they've worked together to create some of the most iconic gaming franchises around, the acquisition is simply a means of deepening this long-standing relationship and allowing Insomniac to gain access to more resources and opportunities so that they can make even better games. If ever there was a win-win situation, it's this one. Sony has acquired several game development studios over the past few years, and while they're no strangers to Insomniac or their amazing portfolio of work, it was Marvel's Spider-Man that served as the deciding factor in proceeding with the acquisition. And smartly, Sony haven't tried to interfere in Insomniac's development process or be completely dictatorial as to how things need to work, but rather provided them with greater support and better tools to make games that are bigger and better than the ones they created while they were independent. And while Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is nearly here, Insomniac are already hard at work on their next title, Marvel's Wolverine, which was announced in September 2021. No actual release date has been announced just yet, but it's safe to say that work on the game has progressed significantly since the announcement, and with Insomniac's near-flawless track record and knowing just how popular Wolverine as a Marvel character is, I think it's another game that will do extremely well when it hits the PS5 in the future. Wolverine is no stranger to the world of video games and has appeared as a protagonist and supporting character in countless titles, but Marvel's Wolverine will be the first next-gen game that he gets to star in, and the fact that it's being developed by Insomniac is some of the best news I've ever heard. It does make me wonder if a whole bunch of Marvel characters will get their own games going forward. Maybe we could see Venom, Carnage, Black Cat, and a host of other faves starring in their own games in the future, so maybe Sony and Insomniac will end up starting a gaming version of the MCU that is ultimately better and more enduring than the cinematic one we're all familiar with, and maybe even wish we weren't as of late. No matter which way you slice it, there's just no denying that Sony's acquisition of Insomniac Games is a 1000 IQ move. They've created several legendary franchises, they've produced 3 amazing next-gen titles, they're about to release a 4th, and a 5th is on the way. You gotta hand it to Sony, their ability to play 4D chess and make good deals that benefit not only themselves but developers and gamers as well is pretty friggin' impressive. And I have absolutely zero doubt that Insomniac Games will continue to deliver amazing titles for many years to come. Unless there's some massive change in direction or strategy, then I just don't really see how this approach is anything short of sheer brilliance. According to stats on Grojo, Insomniac's estimated annual revenue is more than $140 million per year, so if Sony haven't already made back their initial investment and some amazing profits by now, I would be very surprised indeed. Ultimately, I think the reason this acquisition has been such a brilliant one is because Insomniac have such a long and successful history working alongside Sony. Even without the success of Marvel's Spider-Man, it's an acquisition that just makes sense to me, and I feel like it's something that's strengthened both Insomniac and Sony as entities. I am sure gamers will be blown away by Marvel's Spider-Man 2, and am very much looking forward to playing it myself when it releases. As for Marvel's Wolverine, I'm keeping my ear to the ground and I'm sure it's going to be everything we want and more in a Wolverine game. So that's all I've got to say. Now you know why Sony's move to acquire Insomniac was a 1000 IQ move. So how about you? Do you agree with this analysis, or do you have a different take on things? Please let me know in the comments. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for daily gaming, VR, and tech content. From me and the crew, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Later!